You are listening to the Break Time Tech Talks podcast, a bite-sized tech podcast for busy developers, where we'll briefly cover technical topics, news snippets, and more in short time blocks. I'm your host, Jennifer Reif, an avid developer and problem solver with special interest in data, learning, and all things technology. This week, I'll talk about exploring an existing project using the Javelin framework for Java and how I plan to iterate on that project. I also get asked sometimes about what a developer advocate, as well as any similar job titles, actually does. To close us out, I read an article on how digital consumption can hinder our work. The first learning I did this week was exploring an existing project that a colleague and I had built for the Graph Academy Building Applications with Neo4j and Java course. And I'm reviewing this course right now, trying to see how I can improve and simplify it. So iterate on the course and just try to make it better overall. And so I'm exploring the existing project that the application or that the course builds is using the Javelin framework, which is a lightweight Java framework. And it's different from Spring. So my background, most of what I know is building Spring applications. And so I'm kind of excited to explore Javelin a little bit more and understand how things work outside of the Spring world. But my question right now, and the thing that I'm trying to grapple with, as I'm sure many developers do when they're looking at updating an existing project, is whether to build from scratch, from the ground up, basically rip and replace the application that's there. Because right now, there's a lot of additional functionality and features that are built into the application. And while that's super interesting and helpful, I want to peel back those layers just a little bit and start with something super introductory and a starter project, and then allow students to build out from there in what they're interested in, either as optional lessons or maybe a future course or something like that. But the general battle I'm having right now is whether to peel back all those layers at once and build it from the ground up again, or whether to hack away at those extra pieces that we don't need and scale that down. The trouble I have often had when I try to just slash code and remove things that don't feel necessary is that you end up with a non-working solution because you've missed something. Either when you were removing pieces, you missed a reference somewhere, or somehow you ripped extra pieces out and you need to go back and add a couple of things in to make something work because it was using extra things in order to pull all these pieces together and so on. So a lot of times you add additional complexity and debugging when you just try to hack away sections rather than building from the ground up all over again. But on the other hand, it seems kind of silly. We have a really good starting point and good functionality already as is. It seems a little silly to start all the way at the beginning and build all the way from the ground up again. So this is my debate that I'm having right now. We'll see where I end up on that. But I'm really excited to play with Javelin a little bit more. Again, coming from a Spring background, to explore something else and learn about a little bit more about how things work outside of building applications in Spring. Now, I often also get asked, what is a developer advocate or developer evangelist? Sometimes you'll hear even developer relations engineer, and so on. Lots of different flavors of this. I've always, since I was a kid, really liked spelling and etymology, which, if you're not familiar with what that word means, it's the study of the origin of words and the way in which their meanings have changed throughout history. That was a definition pulled off of Google, but it's really understanding what the word means and how it has originated and how it has grown or changed over time. Helping understand the words helps us better understand the context and what things are doing and how words are functioning within sentences and what we actually mean by them. So if you actually break apart the term developer advocate, it is advocating for developers, which means things like technologies, processes, features that make things better or easier for developers. Developer advocates will advocate or encourage, recommend, help teach, and so on, those things. So they're advocating for easier, better ways to do things for developers, for technical professionals. A slightly different job title is called developer evangelist. And just looking at the term evangelist, it's a zealous advocate of something. Often this is put into religious contexts, someone who is advocating for a particular faith. But in this context, of course, we're talking about developers. They're evangelizing technology for developers. They're advocating for technologies. You also hear the term developer relations, or DevRel, it's often shortened to. And really, this is exactly what it says it is as well. It's building relationships with developers or tech professionals and their communities. All of these three terms or job titles technically have slightly different meanings, but often they overlap, they vary depending on the company and the person doing them. And yes, developer advocates, evangelists, DevRel will work for a particular company, and they'll often advocate that company's tech. But I see developer advocates as serving much broader needs for advocating the best technology for a particular problem. They know what a technology handles really well, where its weaknesses are, and when they should recommend it and when they should not. And maybe even what they should recommend instead for a particular problem that doesn't fit the tech they normally advocate for. Often for responsibilities, that means developer advocates need to keep up on the latest trends and technologies. So if they want to recommend a technology, they need to know what all is going on in the space and what are the new things and existing things and how they're used. Then they also need to build things and actually use the tools. This could be applications, it could be helping with systems and integrations, it could be all sorts of demo projects and so on, but it's just actually using the tools so that they understand and know how to put them into production and how to help users with that. Then often developer advocates will create content about a technology, how to use the technology, the features it has, and how to implement those or best utilize them, things like best practices and so on. So teaching others and creating content that help others learn and fully use the technology. Then last but not least is developer advocates will often educate tech professionals. They'll help them learn things, understand how things fit together, help them build things and make them successful with technologies and stacks and so on. Again, often it varies depending on the company you work for, or the person who's doing the job, what kind of priorities they have and the focuses they have. But all of these things kind of blend, and developer advocates often end up doing a lot of different things. I have been a developer advocate for the last 7 years now, and it's a job that I really love and just enjoy the learning and the interacting with other developers and tech professionals and just working with technology and exploring it and sharing what I've learned. The article that I came across this week is called "Digital Consumption Keeps Me from Getting Better at My Job." This was a little bit of a negative perspective, which I didn't anticipate going in. What really caught my eye was the title and the fact that consuming media or content, technical content in my case, sometimes will distract you or pull you away from actually producing things and building things, right? It actually prevents you from utilizing it because you're so busy consuming. And that's what I thought this article was going to be about. And in some cases it is, but it veers off and goes into some other things. But the author does talk about the overwhelming amount of content that's out there and the drive and push and almost natural internet vibe to just consume more and more at a faster and faster pace. You end up never feeling caught up, or at least I don't. There's always something new. There's the latest technology that's just come out. There's a new feature of something. There's things that I need to dig into and learn. There's previous releases that I'm not even up to date on or know what's going on. And so it can feel very overwhelming just to keep up on the technological side, but then not even looking at other things like improving speaking or adding to my repertoire in specific areas, or just exploring what other people are doing in technology and the things they're building and playing around with. We often end up in this kind of doom scrolling or unhealthy consumption. And that's where things like social media or the Netflix keep watching mentalities end up just feeding that and creating this cycle of just consuming and never actually utilizing and producing from that. The author talks about this somewhat in the article, which is also an aspect of this, but I'll just focus in on the kind of technical application of this idea. The drive to consume content is there, but then you never actually have the time to turn around and utilize what you're consuming and put that into practice. Or at least you never feel like you do, because you feel like you're always behind and have to constantly consume more. But the author talks a little bit more about needing a balance between consuming content and learning at a slower and more gradual pace so that you have time to really soak it in and then actually apply and implement the learnings that you have. So build something out of that. And I thought this was really interesting. The author talks about knowing thyself, which is a quote from the article, know where the cutoff or the line should be on helpful educating consumption of information, and then you need the time in order to produce an output and actually implement what you've learned from the consumption. So I thought this was a really interesting aspect, that you need to balance the consumption piece of it and then actually the output of what you've learned, right? I really enjoyed that part of it and thought this fit right into some of the things that I'm dealing with or feeling at this point in time. This week, I started digging into the Javelin framework and exploring it for updating an existing project. Then I explained the often confusing job roles of developer advocacy, developer evangelism, developer relations, and so on. Finally, I wrapped up with an interesting article about how it's important to have a personal balance between consumption and production in order to be successful and knowledgeable, and how that balance can be a battle in a very fast-paced digital era. As always, thanks for listening and happy coding.